Hello, my name is Shelby Millard and I am part of the Visitor and Sales team at Royal Museums Greenwich. Before we begin, this talk is not suitable for those aged under 16. In celebration of LGBT History Month, this is Myths and Mischief. The Romans were freer with sex and sexuality than you might have originally thought. So here are some myths and history that you might not have learned about in school. Now there's one thing that needs to be remembered before we get into this talk. The Romans had no words in Latin for homo or heterosexuality, let alone any of the LGBT acronym. Their view of sex was that one person took the active, masculine or dominant role, and the other person took the more passive, submissive or feminine role. And it's these terms, and terms such as interactions, intercourse and relationships, that I'll be using to describe what is going on throughout this talk. Now this talk usually takes place in the Voyagers Gallery of the National Maritime Museum. So imagine yourself in a room surrounded by a plethora of objects to do with ceremony, trade, war and loss. And your eyes hone in on the smallest object in the gallery, and indeed our entire collection. A silver denarius from 79 BCE, bearing a depiction of Neptune, god of the sea. Now this coin shows that trade and influence from the Roman Empire was already coming into Britain even before the Romans set foot on our shores. Now of course, the Romans did set foot on our shores at around 50 CE, and this brought with it a cultural process called Romanization. Now, Romanization was the transformation of most of Britain into Latin, into people dressing like Romans, behaving like Romans, believing in the Roman pantheon, and of course believing in their views on sex and sexuality. Now you might see a little bit of Greek within these myths, and these myths do have Greek counterparts because the Romans were known for stealing bits of gods and goddesses that took their fancy. Now this myth could definitely be called Greek as well as Roman, because with Apollo, god of music and medicine, the Romans didn't just take a little bit of him. They took the entire god. Now Apollo and his favourite male lover, a Spartan called Hyacinthus, yes, you might have heard me say favourite, the greedy god Apollo did have more than one. They liked climbing the steep rocky cliffs around Sparta. Apollo taught Hyacinthus the use of a bow, how to play the lyre, the art of prophecy or seeing into the future, and exercises in the gymnasium. He also treated Hyacinthus to a swan-drawn chariot ride over all of his sacred lands. Apollo then taught his lover how to play quoits, which was a game much like discus nowadays. And Apollo throws a disc so hard to show his strength and his prowess that it slits the clouds in half. Now, there are two versions of this myth, a common theme in Roman mythology. Version 1. Hyacinthus, wanting to show off to his godly lover Apollo, goes to catch the disc, but he misses it. It bounces so hard on the ground that it ends up fatally wounding him. Version 2. The West Wind, a guy called Zephyrus, is a jealous, jilted lover of Hyacinthus who chose Apollo over him. He takes this opportunity and disrupts the disc's path, so it ends up going straight through Hyacinthus and again fatally wounding him. So whichever version of the myth you take, poor Hyacinthus ends up dying. Apollo weeps for his dead lover, wishing to be mortal so that he can join him in death. Now you might be thinking, well, Apollo's the god of medicine, right? Apollo tried everything, including the nectar of the gods ambrosia, to revive Hyacinthus. However, the poor Spartan's death was sealed by the fates. Apollo, as a god, could not be mortal, so he promised that every song from his lyre would henceforth be about Hyacinthus, and from Hyacinthus' spilled blood he spins a flower, the hyacinth. Now, this next myth is about trickery, lust, and female intercourse. Callisto is a nymph of the goddess of the hunt, Diana, and has sworn a vow of chastity like all nymphs have to. Now, Jupiter, king of the gods and god of thunder and the sky, comes across Callisto while she is bathing naked. Now, Jupiter, even though he is a god, he does feel a certain desire for Callisto. However, he knows that in his form as Jupiter, he will not be able to do anything to seduce her. So he transforms himself into a fake Diana. So this Diana approaches Callisto, woos her, and manages to have intercourse with her because Callisto will do anything that her goddess wishes. Callisto falls pregnant and is found out by Diana and the other nymphs whilst they are bathing naked together. Diana is understandably enraged that she's broken her vow of chastity, and either, yes, we're back to the two versions of how this myth ends. Version 1, just slays her with a shot of her silver bow. Dead. Or version 2, she turns Callisto into a bear. Now Callisto is left to wander the forests, still pregnant with her human son. She gives birth to him and calls him Arcus. And Arcus is raised away from his mother. So in adulthood, he goes hunting, comes across her, and nearly kills her. Jupiter, now seeing his mistake, stops the murder from happening by turning Callisto into Ursa Major and Arcus into Ursa Minor, the Great Bear and Little Bear constellations respectively. Now this story comes from Virgil's Aeneid. Homosexuality is harshly prohibited in the Roman military, but writers like Virgil romanticise this theme by making the characters Greek. Now the Aeneid is based on the Trojan War, and the two characters in question, Nisus and Euryalus, feature first of all in Book 5. Now in Book 5 of the Aeneid, they have just signed up for a foot race, which was on a battlefield, still with bodies and blood. Probably not the best place to have a foot race. However, 5 men, including Nisus and Euryalus, have signed up to show off their strength and their prowess. Nisus takes an early lead. However, he trips and he falls on the blood of those who have just been slain. Now he sees that there is no way he can win, so he trips up the man who was in second, a man called Salius, so that his lover can win. Now this is a sense of how deep their love goes, meaning it's blood deep. But it's also a foreshadowing of their impending doom. We come across the pair again in Book 9, when the Trojan War hasn't gone as well. They are following the highest ranking nobleman left, a gentleman called Aeneas, to a new home. they have signed up for one last night raid, a kind of a little success within the defeat. Now, Nisus is being quite sensible about this. He is slaying enemies as he comes across them and picking up things, only little things that he needs, trading his sword for a better one or a few coins here or there. He is the older man. He is much more used to war. He's being quite sensible about it. Euryalus, on the other hand, is being a little bit greedy. He's not so focused on the killing as more the raiding, and he is taking everything he can get his hands on. Clank, clank, clank. Now his encumberment wakes up the enemies who have not yet been slain. And poor Nisus and Euryalus die side by side after both being stabbed in the heart. Now to jump from the realm of the gods and literature to the realm of the people. Female interactions were far less documented in the empire. Women typically were. Male writers depicted female intercourse needing someone in the active role who had either a phallic object or a clitoris large enough for penetration. There was most likely female interactions going on all over the empire, but whether they had a set of rules or a code, we most likely don't know. Females were praised on being pure and chaste before marriage, and female sexuality was tightly controlled by the empire for fear that if females had control of their own sexuality, society itself would crumble. Now, there are a couple of artworks that display outward lust and desire for other women, and these are both in Pompeii. One in the bathhouses shows a fresco of two women in intercourse, and they look like they're having a jolly good time. And the other is a graffito stating, "I wish I could hold the tender arms and bear kisses on the tender neck. Go on, doll, and trust your joys to the winds. Believe me, light is the nature of men." Now we're going to have a look at the men of Rome. Now, going back to the active and passive roles, this is where they become really important. The active role had to be fulfilled by someone who was a free citizen of the Roman Empire, and the passive role had to be filled by a slave, a former slave, a prostitute, or an entertainer. Entertainers were people such as actors or dancers whose job caused them infamia, which was a loss of citizenship and their protection rights. Now, older Roman men tended towards younger boys aged between 12 and 20. Now, we might think, well, hey, that's a little bit young, but given our UK consent age is 16, in Rome, this was only 12. And you could get married at age 12 too. So this was perfectly fine. Now, the Roman men had terms, mainly derogatory ones, for the boys in their houses, such as concubinus, canaidus, exilitus, and puer delicatus, meaning things like concubines, prostitutes past their prime, boy toys, or boys given to masters of the house before marriage. Now, despite all of these derogatory terms and the fact that Romans took advantage of a lot of people, sex was not the way this was done. Rape was considered a crime, and one of the rare ones that was punishable by execution. So despite all of this, it was all consensual. Now, writers like Dio Cassius and Suetonius recorded Rome and famous families like the Caesars. And it's not uncommon to hear stories of how Julius Caesar had a relationship with King Nicomedes of Bithynia, which almost cost him the empire. Or a crazy man called Caligula and the relationship he had with a man called Catullus, who was very vocal about penetrating him multiple times. Now, there are more stories than this about male-to-male interaction in the Roman Empire. Now, what I've gone through is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Roman LGBT myth and history. However, if you do want to delve into this further, I do suggest you use some kind of private browsing. LGBT history has come a very long way, and I've given you these myths and stories today so that we are stronger in the knowledge that one day we will get global equality. Thank you.